Every revolution starts in the minds of the people.
Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today, my guest is Eric Margolis. Eric is an award-winning, internationally syndicated columnist. His articles have appeared in the New York Times, the International Herald Tribune, Los Angeles Times, Times of London, and a number of other news sites, including across the Middle East and Asia. Eric actually interviewed the founder of Al-Qaeda numerous times, and no, it was not Osama bin Laden, and has covered the Middle East going all the way back to the Lebanese Civil War. Also, the U.S. supported Mujahideen war against the Soviet Union in the 1980s, right through the so-called War on Terror. And he's the author of a book we'll link to called The American Raj, Liberation or Domination, in which he brings his lifetime of insight into the complex reality of the way the Muslim world really operates. He's here today to share some of that insight with us. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be with you.
You know, I was up with insomnia the night of December 7th, going into the morning of December 8th. One of those days where you fall asleep in the afternoon, you can't fall asleep at night. And although I was aware that the rebels were resurgent in Syria and had taken Aleppo, it still came as a shock to me that Damascus fell, that Assad fled, and of course I went right to see what was happening with the Russian base at Tartus, and I saw news that it was being evacuated. And I the first thing I thought is, wow, yeah, the empire finally got itself a win after all these years. But you know much more about what's going on over there. I guess my first question is, how active a hand did Washington have in this, or did they just green light it, or is it just the result of what they did 10 years ago?
Well, we don't know yet for sure. I've been thinking a lot about it myself late at night, trying to figure it out. What it appears to me, best answer to your question, is that Washington was very deeply involved in this with its ally Israel. The two of them cooked up this resistance to the Assad dynasty. Its fall was too rapid and too surprising not to have been accidental. It was contrived program. And the other thing was very important in this is we Americans, we occupy the northern third of Syria, where all their gas and electricity comes from. And that was occupied by American troops. And those gas fields supplied much of the income for the Assad government. And once the Americans took it over, the money was cut off. The government suddenly ran out of money and nobody was giving them any more.
Well, it's strange that, and just to mention, one of the first things I did was I went to your website and I noticed on December 8th that you had posted on the 6th before these latest events happened. And I know you've got an article that just came out today, which we could talk about. I want to actually read the first two paragraphs here because it's a good backdrop for exactly what we're talking about. On December 6th, you wrote, "Syria is the mother of all mysteries. Even the Romans couldn't figure out all the intrigues, plots, factions, coups, and assassinations that were common there, nor could they understand or deal with its hotbed of religions and weird sects. 2,000 years later, not much has changed. This week, irregular forces of a former Al-Qaeda outfit named Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, I'm probably mispronouncing that, appeared out of the countryside and seized Syria's second most important city, Aleppo. Syria's dormant 14-year-old civil war suddenly went critical." So you've got you've Turkey somehow involved in this. You have Israel, of course,
Very much,
And I'm sorry?
very much involved, the Turks.
Yeah. So, I mean, are they acting independently? Are they acting with Washington, against Washington? How do they fit into Washington's plans?
I'm not clear about the Turkish position. I know they're moving to try and block the Kurds from taking more possessions in Syria. They've been fighting a long war against the Kurds, who have been supported since the 1970s by Israel secretly. So the plot thickens here. The Turks are very concerned by this, and they don't like any of these jihadi movements.
So, the thing that I can't get though is the timing. A month before this administration leaves. I mean, you'd mentioned the money started to run out on Assad, but how does it just all collapse, you know, 1 month before Trump comes in, to the extent that that's going to be any different? It just seems there's got to be some other explanation for the timing, or isn't there? Or we don't know.
Oh, you're right, there is. This is what is in classical literature is known as a Parthian shaft. And that's a reference to the Parthians, who were the sort of pre-Iranians, when their horse archers used to, as they were fleeing, leaving the battlefield, they would turn around and fire one arrow at the back of their horse just as they were leaving. And it's a very famous literary trope. But the Parthians, or modern day Syrians or Iranians or whatever you want to call them, what happened was that it was Biden's parting shot. He and his administration, which are 110% pro-Israel, pro-Israel's right wing, I should say, this was their last effort to really kick down Syria and leave the way open for Israel's expansion.
You know, when they first started, well, I should say when the U.S. participated in the overthrow of the Ukrainian government, and coming right on the heels of this civil war in Syria, you know, one of the things I wrote about at the time is it doesn't seem like it's a coincidence that these are two places where Russia has one of its precious warm water ports. One of them's in Sevastopol in Crimea, the other one's in Syria. How much is Washington's interest in Syria about Russia, in your opinion?
It is certainly because we hear all the Republicans crowing, that's been a kick in the head to the Russians, embarrassment for President Putin, and it's a big deal. The Russians don't have the money to sustain their little small war in Syria. The ports on Tartus and Latakia are very small. The Russians, they're just more sort of service ports. They're not to be confused with Gibraltar or Sevastopol. But the Russians, what I find interesting are the underground links between the Ukraine war and Israel, because Israel is quietly supporting the Ukrainians, and some Israelis on the far right are even saying that this will be the next European Israel.
That Ukraine.
Yes.
Hmm. And I remember going back 10 or 12 years, there was talk of a pipeline that supposedly Assad would not allow to be built, and that this might have, that if it were built, it might cut into some of the Russians' supply of oil and gas to Europe. Is that something that's still an issue, or is that old news?
Not that I'm aware of. It's old news because the Russian supplied oil has been pretty well blocked off by the Biden administration and its European allies. So Russia is selling very little oil west. And the Americans, meanwhile, have become the world's largest oil exporter. So the American plan is to get the Europeans to buy their oil from the US rather than Russia.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess what's on my mind is that I would assume at some point that this Ukraine war is going to end. The last I heard, Russia still has one of the two Nord Stream pipelines, and it's possible that that trade could be reestablished. So I hope, yeah, maybe Syria no longer has anything to do with that. Um, but certainly, I would think that these two conflicts are a lot more connected than probably even I, before you just said that about Israel, would have made them. I think most people can think about them as this is the U.S. and the Middle East, and the Ukraine conflict is the U.S. and Europe, but it's gotten to be a much smaller world than that.
You're right, 100%.
So one of the things I saw early on, and it's so hard to know whether what's real anymore. What's an AI that somebody has put out to, push their narrative or whatever. So I saw an announcement by the leader of this group that is in command in Syria, at least for the moment, telling them not to pursue people who've surrendered or are fleeing. A very moderate message, no reprisals, that kind of thing. And then I see all these videos on social media platforms of just brutal atrocities taking place. What do you have any sense of what's real and what's not?
Well, I go way back in Syria. I know the country well, and the Syrians, and a very interesting people, by the way, and revenge is in their DNA. And things have been so horrible in Syria over the years that the lust for revenge must be very strong, and they will go after people who committed war crimes. The problem is that there have been 14, I think, attempted coups in Syria since 1946. All the foreign intelligence agencies are trying to overthrow the Assad regime. All the different ethnic religious groups there, Christians, Zoroastrians, you name it, trying to overthrow the Ba'athist Syrian regime. So that's why they have all these horrible stories of prisons and torture. And the government has been repressing the country, but repressing at groups that are being financed from abroad and encouraged from abroad. So it's a really lousy situation.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, and I've had some other people who've been to Syria on. One of the things I've always tried to make sense of is we know what Washington says. They want Assad out. So he's a brutal dictator. He does this, he does that. And I don't know how much of it to believe. And let's just say he is a somewhat brutal ruler. Who is it he's oppressing? Are these people that, if not oppressed, would, create some kind of a Islamic state there? And is that what we're going to see now that this group that's just come to power is there?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know that much about the Tahrir al-Shams, but they are militant Islamists. The majority of Syrians are Sunni Muslims, right? The Assad regime were Alawites, which is a very odd sect along the coast in Latakia and Tartus. They're sort of like oh, help me, what, in the Shuf Mountains in Lebanon, come back to me, I'm sorry, the strange religious groups that you have in Lebanon, who also fought the same way against the governments, against the Shiites, against the Sunnis. It's very complicated. And this whole area, it's the fault of the French. You have to go back to understand colonialism lies at the base of all the problems of today. As a Libyan foreign minister once said, he blames it on the British, but the French were responsible too because they created Syria out of a geographical region of the Ottoman Empire, which was all right. It was easygoing, live and let live. There were no major problems. And the French then created a state out of this area, which they called Syria. put the Maronite Christians in charge, talking Lebanon still, and reap the whirlwind, because the trouble with the Druze, the name I was trying to think of, and the Christians and Armenians, etc. Same situation all over Syria. So it's French created Syria the way the British created Iraq, made up of all kinds of disparate and often inimical groups.
So going forward, we don't you don't have an impression that this is another ISIS, and that's how they sound so far. Do you think that there's any kind of a there was kind of a deal between the Taliban and the United States when the United States left, and after the United States left, we kind of in Afghanistan, we kind of heard a softer version of the Taliban. Was that real? Were they never as bad as we were told they were, or what's the story there? And
Well,
is this the same story here in Syria?
I can answer that because I was in Afghanistan with the Taliban at their birth, and which was a bunch of religious students who banded together, were given some arms by Pakistan, and went out to fight communist forces who were raiding, and bandits raiding the caravans and snatching women and raping them. And you wouldn't think this normally. The Taliban was an anti-rape force, but they were.
Yeah.
And as more people tried to overthrow them, they became more radical. But they were a down-home, plain-minded group of vigilantes. But they were mountain warriors too, and that is their ethics. So we overstated it. There was tremendous amount of propaganda mill, and the U.S. mainstream press went into high gear, accusing them of all kinds of things, and even jaywalking. And a completely false portrait was painted of them. But part of the American propaganda strategy was to paint them as barbarians and oppressors of the women. So they got all the women in the U.S. teary about this problem of the Afghan women, and they supported the war for a while.
I don't want to get too far away from Syria, but the whole thing with them blowing up statues and ancient artifacts and all that, was there truth to that, or?
Primitive, yes. The really Orthodox mountain Muslims there, Islam is totally against any depiction of human body. So statues, particularly, thou shalt not worship graven idols. Even we know about that. And the Taliban took it literally and said that all idols to be blown up, which they did. It's barbaric. It was wrong, but that's their thing.
Right, and you mentioned Israel, so this is another thing that I guess I wasn't expecting. I probably should have been, that Israel actually has troops inside Syria right now. Do you see that as something where it's just completely opportunistic and they're never going away? Or is there some legitimate security concern they have where, I don't know, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they might have some reason for this?
Well, I think it's long planned. It's part of Israel is an expansionist state. It's a settler state. It wants more land. So the Israelis utilize salami tactics. They take a little slice here, a little slice there, and soon you have a big hunk of land. Israel's right wing has been very forthright in saying that they want to occupy more parts of the Arab world. Southern Lebanon for sure, perhaps parts of Jordan, certainly parts of Syria. Anything area land that's fertile or strategic is on Israel's menu request.
And do you think if I heard Damascus is inside the target area and there might be some energy concerns there as well, or am I getting mixed up?
Energy's up north, now occupied by American troops. strange that we always go into areas that have oil and gas.
Yeah, it was so funny because Trump, no filter, he just said, we're just going to go in and take the oil. And I don't know, nobody told me you're not supposed to say that out loud. We're supposed to have some kind of a story where we're fighting terrorists or something. Do, do you see the United States staying there, or is there
No,
an
I think
exit for that?
we'll let the Israelis take it over. They are happy to do it. The Trump administration is even, excuse me, more pro-Israel than the Biden administration was, which are both unprecedented in their support for Israel and giving it carte blanche. The Israelis will take over, perhaps they intend to take over all of Lebanon or part of Syria or even take Damascus. It's possible. You see maps in Israel of everything from Damascus to the Suez Canal being taken by the Israelis. They tried to take Sinai, you remember, in 1967, but we had a president then, Eisenhower, who told them to get the hell out quickly, and they got out. We don't have that anymore.
I'm sure I'm going to get the emails after this interview. The Jews are running everything, but in, in reality, like, is Israel? Who's running who when it comes to Israel and the United States? Are we acting more in their interest, or is it in Washington's interest to have kind of a little empire over there that it can use as a partner?
Costs us billions of dollars every year. I don't think it's in Washington's interest, but Israel's supporters in the States, some of them, not all of them, some of them want a bigger, a greater, more powerful Israel. It's become a religious issue with many. There are Jews who are against Zionism. We say no, it's not. Judaism has nothing to do with politics or territory or real estate. It's a very pure religion of good. And these people, these armed settlers and things like that, are not doing good. But the U.S. Ariel Sharon, former general in Israel, put it very well. He said, "I own Congress." And again, one of his loose-lipped statements that Trump would have made. He said, "I own Congress." And he was like, "Wait a minute, what about the United States? What will they say?" He said, "I don't worry about it. I own Congress."
Yeah, and I was going to say, certainly, I don't think the average American benefits from this. I often think, though, that the what I call the empire, the permanent
Yes.
establishment in Washington, unelected employees, and all their connected friends in the business world, they might have an interest in what Israel's doing or an expansionist Israel. I'm not sure that's true, but I would think that they think they do.
We know that Trump's son-in-law, his name again,
Oh,
the
Jared
Jared
something.
Kushner, yeah,
Kushner,
Kushner
yeah.
is trying to float a project to set up a beach resort along the Gaza coast. So, yeah, they're interested where there's profit to be made. And the rest of the Arab world is indifferent or scared, or just they're more scared of the Islamists than they're scared of the Israelis, because the Islamists are anti-corruption and they are in favor of elections and popular views. The people in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf don't like this one little bit.
Yeah, one of the things I always said about the Afghanistan war was, I mean, there's no other interpretation than that the Taliban had a lot of popular support. They could never have survived all those 20 years without, popular support among the people. And, we keep saying, "Oh, we're over there promoting democracy," but I have a feeling that if everybody held a fair, free and fair election, I don't think Washington would like the results in too many countries over there.
Oh, I wrote a couple of times that Taliban, unpleasant as they were in some ways, was the only legitimate democratic movement in Afghanistan. And they really represented the will of the people, not of the minorities who we allied with, but we made ourselves enemies of the Taliban. We should never have done that. They used to be our boys. When I was covering the war in Afghanistan against the Soviets with the Mujahideen, they were our boys. They were freedom fighters. That's what they called. And all of a sudden, one day the switch flicks and now they're terrorists.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember, that they kind of used our own constitution against us, because I do remember them saying, well, look, if you want us to extradite bin Laden, then, send us your proof. We'll have him tried. And I think they said a court in a Muslim
Islamic
neutral
court.
country.
You're
Yeah.
right.
And if he's found guilty, we'll give him up. Now, I mean, over here, people would say, oh, well, that's all, that's a fixed court. They're never going to do that. But hey, we can't just give them up. We would never give somebody up with no proceeding whatsoever. So just, very interesting when you dig into the details of some of these
Any
things.
more than we would ship Dick Cheney to
Yeah.
stand trial in Iraq.
Right, right. Well, Eric, I know time is limited here. Is there anything about Syria or what's going on in the Middle East in general that is on your mind we haven't covered here yet today?
Well, as a postscript, I would say that one of Israel's right-wing politicians said recently that we are going to redraw the map of the Middle East. And we've been talking earlier, saying, how far is this going to go? Do they intend to take over Syria? Will there be changes made in Iraq or in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf? What about Egypt, which contains the more Arabs than any other place? They're not really Arabs, they're Nilotics. But Egypt is the big question. And Egypt is a much uglier dictatorship than Syria ever was. I've been there a lot, and I know it's a scary place where torture and extrajudicial executions happen all the time. And Mr. al-Sisi, or Field Marshal al-Sisi in Egypt, is a much nastier dictator than the Assads ever were.
Yeah, so I guess if somebody was looking for a reason in Washington to turn the sights on Egypt, there it is. It's served up for them.
But Egypt is obedient and to America's imperial interests in the Middle East. So, and they have locked up the Palestinians. They've closed the borders, won't even let these people escape this hell on earth. So the Egyptians, we have to keep an eye on them. They are not our friends.
Interesting. Well, Eric, I appreciate your time so much. I hope that we can get you back on here as things develop over there and just keep getting your insights. And of course, we'll link to your website and your book. And it's been great talking to you.
It's a pleasure and a relief for me to talk to someone as well educated and knowledgeable on the subject as you. Good. Let's do some more.
All right. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.